And we're back. Episode 8, Rubitracks After Dark. Trackmaster Scott, how are you tonight, man?
Great, Nick. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, real good. Yeah, good to get back on here. We've been looking forward to this episode now that we finally got a little bit of runtime on the mountain tracks.
Hmm.
So here we are.
That was your trip out to, what did you call it? Iron Mountain?
Yeah, Iron Mountain, California. It's off of Highway 88. It's a defunct ski resort. So it operated, I think, about 30 or 40 years. And at some point, ownership decided to get rid of it. And it was probably in the States, a lot of times ski resorts have like a special lease and they're maintained on public land, on Forest Service land. So
Hmm.
in this particular circumstance, they walked away. The land reverted to the federal government, to the Forest Service, and then that whole area, because it had kind of been tailored to a ski resort, it had some runs, some areas that had been cleared. They turned it into a snow park. So
Oh, wow.
it's yeah, so it's currently a recreation area that's open to all sorts of winter recreation, including motorized. So if you've got an oversnow vehicle, they've got a nice parking lot, a little bathroom set up, and
Nice.
you can roll in, you can camp, you can go for the day. And when you get out on the snow, you're kind of at the top elevation of a ski resort. And then they've got a bunch of different runs and trails and a cat track that all go down the mountain. So it's a pretty
Oh,
unique
cool.
setup.
So you got to climb back up the hill before you go home, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So that kind of can get some folks in trouble sometimes, right? Um,
Maybe that's why
I
it
remember,
failed.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Right. Whether you're on skis, a snowboard, or wheeling around, yeah, you can get in trouble pretty quick.
Yeah.
I know I learned early in my snow wheeling career that if you're just barely making your way and it's flat or downhill, you better stop what you're doing and turn around because sure as hell not going to make it up a grade if you're struggling in the flats. Yeah, but so this was the first run. I've had a few now, but it was New Year's Day, so a couple weeks back, and
Hmm.
was able to meet up with. It was the first three sets of mountain tracks that shipped all
That's
together, the
right.
bundle we spoke about. So, a couple guys from Central California and myself. They are new to the track game, so they got their mountain tracks mounted up, and we met here at Iron Mountain and took a spin and just kind of used it as a training day. Conditions were relatively packed, but the coverage was good, probably 4 or 5 feet of base
Wow.
snow. Yeah, so we were able to get out there and just kind of run around and drive up and down ski runs. I brought a buddy with me. We both had our snowboards, so we took some turns doing some shuttling and some snowboarding.
Yeah, yeah.
It was
Nice.
heck yeah.
Yeah.
So the we got into some ditches and some side hills, and then because of the condition of the snowpack being relatively packed, yeah, we were climbing some ridiculous grades, and I know some
Yeah.
of that footage made it out, but I'm sure we'll drop some here in the video as well because it was nuts, dude. The stuff we were driving up that day.
Yeah. At first, when you sent me that video, I assume maybe you tilted the camera because the trunks of the trees were starting on a curve a little bit. And then you pan
Sure.
up and you see the trees, and that Jeep is like just climbing the side of a wall, basically. Like it was unreal.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's a good point that you made because yeah, so that's a northern aspect. So it's sloping down to the north, it's away from the sun.
Yeah.
So you mentioned those trees over their course of their life were getting hit by snow slides pretty often. So when they're young, they're getting leaned on or pushed on. And then
Yeah.
obviously as they get stronger and they start growing, they resume the position. And
Yeah.
yeah, you see the little bowing. So yeah, so that was a great time. And even though, we haven't really had the deep powder, at least I haven't had the opportunity yet to get out in the deep powder. Uh, some of those little tests and trials that we did, it's awesome to see the way that the mountain tracks are working.
Hmm.
I think you and I were pretty convinced that they were going to perform well, but it's always nice when you see that concept hit the ground and
Hmm.
start getting some real world feedback.
Right. So how did it perform on the hill there in specific? Do you notice any difference between that and what was before it
Yeah, so
in
I would
those
say
conditions?
Yeah. So I would say overall, just the added surface area, in addition to the taller lug that's adding a little bit
Mm,
of traction. Even even with packed snow, I mean, the stuff that we were able to drive up was pretty nutty, and
right.
we had quite a wide range of vehicles. Since the last show, I also put this rig as it sits on tracks. I took it down to a semi truck scale, a certified cat scale here in northern
Mm,
Nevada. Whole setup weighed in at exactly 5,000 pounds. Fuel, tools, and these tracks bolted up. Anyway, so between the total weight at 5,000 pounds and then the surface area of the mountain track kit is just shy of 3,800 square inches, gives a ground pressure of 1.34 psi. So a little bit
that's down
heavier.
there.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a little more dense than like a purpose-built snowcat, right? Like I've got a couple Tucker 2000 extra lights in the shop and ran the numbers on them as well. They come in about 1.06. So they're a shade over a pound. And this guy, it's not much worse, 1.34. So
You're about 30% heavier
yeah,
per
or more
inch.
heavier
Just
on the snow. Yeah.
yeah.
So, but so what we wind up seeing, so we've got a lot of flotation compared to where we used to be,
Mm,
and then having that taller lug when you've got packed, consolidated snow conditions like we were running that day. I would say that some of the grades we were climbing were probably. I know grades are measured differently than just a straight up degree angle, but
mm-hmm.
I'm fairly certain we were pushing 35, 40 degrees, some pretty significant inclines. Basically, something that you would look at and say, "There's no way I can drive up that in a
Yeah.
Jeep or in a Toyota," and just line up to the hill, and it went right up.
Steep enough you'd want to watch the oil pressure gauge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely some rigs that could struggle with that, I imagine. So
Yeah. So that's what you call hero snow, is it?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get
Hero
out on those
snow.
days, and I learned that from my snowmobile buddies because it's a day that you really just can't do wrong. No matter
Yeah.
what you do, you're not going to sink and be having to have your buddies help you dig out. So
Yeah.
everyone's a hero on those days for sure.
Just like a big just like a big foam mattress. You know, that's a common question too, and I'm sure you get it quite often. And a lot of people don't truly appreciate the difference in the snow, like from day to day, from week to week, and from region to region. Like to break it down, it's as simple as snow you can make a snowman from, and snow that you can't, right? And then everything in between,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right?
So in our situation is a little bit unique just by volume here in the Sierra Nevada, we get a big spread. So
Hmm.
predominantly we get what we like to call Sierra cement. And
Hmm.
so it comes hard and heavy and wet. It's pretty consolidated. And then the snow weight itself, it's so dense that it naturally compresses pretty fast.
Right.
Um, but again, the more shots you get, the more often you have of being at different parts of the spectrum. So we'll have powder days. Typically it doesn't last real long, but there's been times, I think even on during our invitational, we had a couple videos. We were up on that mountainside on the first day and I was driving the Forerunner and it was throwing snow, over the hood. So
Yeah.
it'll happen. And that was in April. You know what I mean? So you never know
Yeah.
really what you're going to get. We are susceptible to getting some what they call GOA lows, Gulf of Alaska low pressure systems. And so
Yeah.
they form in the Gulf of Alaska, they slide down the coast and it can get cold in a heartbeat and have some moisture behind it. And in those circumstances, we're prone to some powder days. It just doesn't last very long. So
Right. So that's more due with geology, I guess, than it is to do with the temperature, or is it just because it doesn't get super cold there very often?
yeah, yeah,
Like,
the geography of it, as far as us being relatively close to the ocean. So, and then specifically, if you want to get into like microclimate, here in Tahoe, we have this giant lake, and it's the average depth is 1,000 feet, so it is a giant heat sink.
yes,
Um, and
yeah,
that the water temperature year round only shuttles from 55 degrees Fahrenheit to like 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And so in the dead of winter, it's really warm and it's sitting out there.
yeah,
And in the middle of summer, it's really cool and it's sitting there. So We'll
Yeah.
get some lake effect stuff occasionally because of that, right? Where you get a real cold wind blows across a relatively warm lake, and it'll pick up some moisture. Um, but as the crow flies, the Pacific Ocean from here is about 140, 150 miles. So
Mm.
yeah, we can get some big consolidated storm systems that haven't had an opportunity to get torn up by mountains and everything across the continent.
Yeah. Yeah. Straight
Yeah,
off the ocean.
for sure.
So then you
So
say if it cycles between 45 and 55, then Lake Tahoe never freezes then.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. So 55 Fahrenheit to about 65 in the summer. That's kind of the 10-degree range.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and then so the lake proper has never frozen over in recorded history. There is a bay that's relatively isolated called Emerald Bay. It's right on the southwest corner of Lake Tahoe,
Hmm.
and it has such a narrow, shallow mouth where it joins the rest of the lake that it climatically kind of acts as its own little body of water. That
Okay.
has frozen over on a couple of our real cold years,
Oh.
but not the lake at large. Yeah. So so getting back to this little track training day we had, we found
Hmm.
a couple really good ditches where we had little creek crossings, and there
Hmm.
was small snow bridges where you could see clearly that 4 or 5 foot snowpack would disappear to nothing, and you'd have a really abrupt little ditch. So my old rule of thumb has always been, if there's something like that, it's relatively minor. It's got a snow bridge. A lot of times I'll test it on my feet, and I just kind of shuffle my steps out. And if I can walk it, I know that I can drive it in my rig.
Hmm.
So I found a good spot and drove across. And then one of the guys we were out with, let's see, right
Dale.
there, Dale
Yeah.
and this TJ, he decided to dive in and go for a real nasty spot where there was almost no snow bridge.
Hmm.
So as he drove down into it, we've got the new raised front on the mountain track. So one side immediately hit the other bank and started climbing. The other side hit like an inverted wall. So even with that higher lip, it drove the front down. But it was
Yeah.
a great opportunity. So he put that thing in reverse. And what we wound up with was the two tracks were articulated. So one was in the climbing position, ready to rock and roll. The other one wound up nose down where it kind of needed a little bit of help.
Yeah.
So these guys were fresh out. The TJ had no front bumper, no winch. He's just putting the rig together and wanting to learn. Um, I grabbed the action tracks, the plastic recovery boards that I have. He threw the thing in reverse for just a split second, and we opened a little gap in front of that track that had inverted.
Yeah.
And no bullshit, probably 30, 45 minutes, seconds with a shovel, straightened it out, threw a traction board down. He rolled back into it. It brought the inverted track's nose up. Once the front end was over, the crevasse had opened, right? Just the action of driving the front axle across had just caused like this 5 foot hole. So
Wow.
we kicked some snow into that. At that point, we took the pair of traction boards underneath the body of the vehicle, right? Like right in this zone,
Yes.
dropped them in, and it drove right through. So time with the traction boards, time with the shovel, complete a minute or two, and it
Yeah.
just cruised this giant hole. So um, those are conditions out here that we deal with a lot. When you have
Yeah.
mild storms, a lot of times water is still running, and running water is the bane of accumulating snow. It's really hard for
Yeah.
snow to get built up when you've got relatively warm water that's flowing. So it was great. It provided a really nice opportunity to show the guys, what they could do, and what the tracks were capable of, and
Yeah.
how an operator you could deal with different conditions that we find when we're out.
And I believe we should be doing more of that. And I believe that's what this is kind of about, right? Is to try and educate the public about how to properly use tracks. Like they're so sensationalized on the internet and touted as either being junk or indestructible, and they're neither. But used correctly, and if you understand the principles behind them, they're a phenomenal piece of equipment that'll take you places you could only dream of going with anything else. It's just
For sure.
unfortunate that so many people have such a misconception of not only what they're about, but how they should be used.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's one of the things that's kind of set this program aside. Like
Mm,
all the information that we're throwing out, it may not always be the most exciting or flashy or whatever, but we're not here for the bullshit. There's enough bullshit out there already, right?
yeah,
We want to try to drop some facts and, like you're saying, let people know that when used appropriately, it's when we open our toolbox every day, we're not like Jeremy Clarkson. The hammer doesn't do everything, right?
yeah, yeah.
Sometimes
That's
you need a
right.
spanner, sometimes you need
Yeah,
pliers, and that's exactly what this is. It they are a multi-tool. They're useful in a lot of situations, but there's definitely things that you can do wrong, and
yeah,
uh, we're trying to avoid that for sure.
yeah, yeah. No, it's great to see that it's becoming more of a community than it ever was before, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, we've had ever since you and I met, whatever that's been, 3 4 years
Mhm.
ago. Um, yeah, the contacts mutually that have come from that I knew or guys that you knew, and we've started to.
Yeah,
Everyone's been able to meet up a few times. It's been really cool.
you get
Because
to meet
going
some
back,
very. Sorry, I was gonna
yeah, I
say
was
you
gonna
get
say,
to meet some very interesting people.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And going back to what you mentioned before, because snow is so different, different regions and all that kind of stuff, we've all come up with different methods and processes. And then
yeah,
when I'm dealing with something that is atypical for my part of the world, I'm able to fall back on some of that knowledge that we've shared.
that's absolutely right.
So in other news, we have this UTV program that we've been working on,
Yeah,
and it sounds like there's a couple more. You've gotten a little bit of feedback, a couple more photos back from some other installs, huh?
yeah. We've got another one down there in
Connecticut, Massachusetts.
Connecticut. I haven't gotten an official report back from the owner yet. It was sort of a dealer install, I believe, however that works. But
So, and that one was a little bit unique because that was the first UTV install where you've they elected
yes,
to go with the XL, the Lake XL.
yes, yes, exactly. And that was we were talking about that on a previous podcast. How some of these machines, are a little bit ass heavy, potentially at least. And putting that little bit longer track on the back kind of balances that out, I believe. So it was a nice looking machine, like a beautiful photos I got of it. Now I'd be interested to see how it looks out in the bush, not just a parking lot.
Right. Yeah, and that matches a little bit. It's a little bit more typical layout of like what you'd see from the manufacturers. Um,
Mm,
you have Camzo at large that's building a bunch of Rubitracks and a bunch of kits. They are manufacturing at least the what do they call it? Apache XC, which is the new four-season track from Can-Am.
mm,
And then I know they were private labeling Polaris Prospector tracks as well.
mm.
So when you look at those, industry standard, off the shelf ATV, UTV tracks, that's the common configuration is to run that larger track in the rear.
Yeah,
You don't have as many clearance issues, steering load, traction issues. So there's a few reasons for them to do that. But in the side by sides where you're either mid or rear engine setup, yeah, it certainly gives you a little more flotation in the heavy ass end, like you say.
yeah. So now we're talking about PSI the other day in our group chat. Now you're at what do you say, 1.34?
Yeah, exactly.
And now we're taking and we're putting that lake track on a Polaris Razor or Ranger that weighs what, 3,000 pounds. So now that
So
Ranger is getting pretty close to Tucker territory, isn't it?
absolutely, yeah. So the one that I've done out here in my neck of the woods was a Can-Am HD10 Defender Crew Cab.
Yeah.
So 1000 cc utility machine, actually has bench seats front and rear, so it's rated up to 6 people. A small utility bed behind it, but I think the dry weight of that machine is pretty close to 2100. Um, and
So that's below 1 psi.
yeah, yeah. So you'd have surface pressure significantly below like an extra light Tucker,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
depending on loading, of course, and who you put in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're talking what did we come up with? The lake kit as it sits, I think was 20, was it 2,800, 2,900, something like that?
I think it was right around the 28. Would have to go back and look at the.
Yeah, yeah. So where the mountain track kit here is approximately 3,800. I think it's 3,720, something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, depending on the vehicle, we are working with on a couple options of getting these things on some buggies here. And
Hmm.
you saw that picture. I think I sent it to you this morning, but it was
Yeah.
a wheel scow. So basically, there's a small, looks like a bathroom scow. You got four of them, and then there's a spider cable that plugs into a main computer. And race car builders use them all the time because you can figure out weight bias. And when you build a
Yeah.
car, is one side heavier than the other, one end, front to back. You can really balance the car, figure out your braking bias. There's all sorts of applications in the racing world.
Yeah.
So this particular car is a bomber. So it's built by Bomber Fabrication right here in my neck of the woods, Gardnerville, Nevada. It's the chassis has the owner is Randy Slauson. He races King of the Hammers. Some people here might be familiar. He's one of three men living that have won that race three times,
Wow.
and we're getting ready here in a couple weeks to go for number four. So it's the race who can be first, get to four wins. Hopefully
Nice.
that'll be us here in a few weeks. But
Yeah.
long story short, he builds these tube chassis race cars, Ultra Four cars. And a couple years back, he started adapting the chassis to trail use. So he built a car that we call Gold Digger. It's got kind of his typical blue paint, and then it has some golden accents. And it's a four wheel steer rock buggy.
Yeah.
It's got a direct injected V8. Uh, it has Spider Tracks, custom axle housings. It's all super heavy duty, go fast stuff. And it's four wheel steering. So we're going to work on seeing if we can get some tracks on that thing and see how it does, because on 42-inch tires it's like 3,600 pounds. So
Yeah.
even if we put a set of mountain tracks on it, we're still going to be below 4,000. We're going to have snowcat type ground pressure in a vehicle that has double the horsepower of a snowcat, all kinds of suspension travel, four-wheel steering. It's going to be wicked.
Yeah. I can't believe, of all the things we've seen and put tracks on, that's one thing we've not put them on yet. And if I owned one, that's the first thing I'd want to put on it, especially with the terrain you have out there. And like
So
those things are on every corner out there, aren't they? Like the rock buggies.
yeah, you go to the grocery store, you see a couple of them sitting out there.
Yeah, yeah. A heck of a lot more than there are here. All we have here is GMCs and Silverados.
Yeah. So that'll be a sight. Maybe sometime
Yeah.
after, we're getting ready for this big race, but sometime afterwards, see if we can put that plan in motion. So the four wheel steer car, Gold Digger, Randy actually sold to his cousin. Conveniently, is his co-driver for King of the Hammers. So all
Yes.
of us will be together at the race. By the time it's over, about the middle of February, hoping we have some fresh snow, we're going to work
Hmm.
on getting these mountain tracks onto Gold Digger. And then Randy has one of the Maverick R's, so the new high performance Can-Am that has that real funky spindle, right, where the
Yes. Yeah.
comes out and over the tire.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, Can-Am decided to put that vehicle on a 6-on-5.5 lug pattern.
Yeah.
So it's actually using the same bolt pattern that like a Toyota or a half-ton Chevy GMC would use.
Yeah.
So if we do the buggy, if the four-wheel steer buggy, maybe it'll be one of those days where if I can find another set of tracks, I can throw them on that Maverick R. We can run both of those things on a little field day, and I'll hop on one
Yeah.
of the tracks. We'll see what they can do.
Yeah, that'd be cool. How many horsepower is that UTV?
That UTV is I think it's either 215 or 230, something like that.
Wow. That's got some
And,
jam then.
and I wouldn't be surprised if it's more by the time we get our hands on it, because Randy doesn't let sleeping dogs lie very often. So those are a couple things we got in the hopper we're looking forward to. Of course, by the time folks are seeing this episode, we will have done our live with Dwayne from British
In the
Columbia.
Arctic.
That's right. So, as far as you know, will that be the first time that a set of Rubitracks is run in the Arctic Circle?
No, that's not. We've got a setup there. It spent a couple years in Yellowknife, and then they're up. I'm trying to think of where they are. Same parallel is where Dwayne is, but over on the other side by the. So we've got a set up there on a Ford F-150. Says they're running great in minus 51 degrees Celsius. So that's pretty freaking cold, you know.
Yeah, that's cold enough that even just normal things that you would completely take for granted stop working, right?
Yeah,
Like,
like when I worked in the oil field, it was common to work in minus 40, and it would be minus 40. And so when we say minus 40, Celsius and Fahrenheit are neck and neck at minus 40. They both mean the
yeah,
same thing, right?
cross at
We
some point down
we
there.
we both know how cold it is. So I was well versed in that, and it would stick around for a week or 10 days, and you just let your vehicles run outside 24 hours a day, or they'd never start again. And you had
Yeah.
10 more degrees onto that, like that's pretty snapping cold. You know,
Yeah.
rubber doesn't bend anymore. Your tires are just big blocks of ice. Like it's pretty solid. So
Yeah, I've
that's what they're
never,
dealing with up there. I think it's a little warmer where Dwayne's at there. I think he said it's like going to be minus 30. So that's somewhat tolerable. It's still pretty crispy though.
yeah. Yeah, because Dwayne is kind of on the western end. I think he said Inuvik is where he's
Inuvik,
at.
yeah. Yeah, he ran up the Dempster Highway all the way to Inuvik. He's got a brother up there that's I can't remember what exactly he's working at. Maybe some sort of merchant up there, I believe.
Yeah, I asked him. In fact, right before we jumped on here, Dwayne had a little preview, and
Yeah.
I asked him, and yeah, I think he said he's running, yeah, some kind of store mercantile thing. I mean, you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine that. Like, I guess you guys have. I don't know if you do on the island, but in Canada at large, you have Canadian Tire, right? And they
Yes,
sell
yeah. And we have it here on the island. It's not that small. We have two of
nice. But I know the last time I was in Canada, we stopped in a couple times, and man, they had everything. Like,
them. Yeah.
we went from bear spray, which I think we had to like fill out a little registration. They wanted to know some stuff
Yeah, oh
while we were
yeah.
back.
It wasn't like when I was down there and I went to, I can't remember what store that was, but I bought Tannerite and walked out of the store with it. Like they didn't ID me or nothing. If I tried to carry Tannerite around Canada, they'd throw me right in the pen. There'd be a SWAT team here.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Those are good
Yeah,
times.
sure.
Yeah, well, good deal. So we've got buggies, side by sides, and a little bit
Yeah.
of Arctic Circle action coming up for the next episode. I'm
Yeah. The
looking
winter's
forward to
just
it.
getting rolling.
Yeah, one thing we haven't said on this show ever before, but I know we're it's common knowledge for you and I based on the Rubitracks Invitational last year. So that
Hmm.
was early April, and the way things work around here, we do our final season snow surveys on April 1st. So that's typically the maximum snow depth on ground. Basically, what that means is it's usually still snowing after that, but it's no longer gaining. It's usually waning by then.
Yeah.
So you figure here we sit, and it's what, January
Mid-
15th.
Middle of January. Still 2.5 months before you get to your peak snowpack.
Exactly right. So it
Yeah.
has been a slow start, but yeah, as
There's still lots
more
of
often
winter
than
left.
not, there's a reason that averages are averages, and on average, this is one of the snowiest plates, at least down here in the Trump country.
Yeah. This might be Trump country too if we're not careful.
Hey, you never know, man. Yeah, I
Uh,
figure if we get Canada and Greenland, we'll have
yeah.
lots of snow tracking area left to do.
So which one gets to be the 51st state, Canada or Greenland?
Well, I figure we may as well. We still gotta isolate Quebec. They probably want to be their own state.
Yeah,
Uh,
we always said we wish Quebec could separate so it'd be a shorter drive to Ontario. Okay.
no shit. Yeah, good times, man. All right, Scott. Well, so that about wraps us up, I think, here for episode 8 of Rad Rubitracks After Dark. Always a good time chatting with you, man. And
You
we'll
too,
look forward
Nick. Right on. We'll talk to you again.